performance early in the year was back, and then as we move through the summer now, performance is back, and that's having a knock-on effect in terms of the amount of lambs that are drafted and the amount of lambs that are going to be left on the farm now as we move into September and October.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. In this week's episode, we're joined by Sheep Enterprise Leader Dr. Philip Creighton to discuss planning ahead for this autumn. We discussed the impact the grazing conditions has had on management this autumn. Philip emphasises the importance of assessing grass supply, looking at increased farm demand on farms this autumn. We discussed grass growth rates, fertiliser application and building covers as we move into the autumn. We finish up with Philip discussing the need to put in plans in place for finishing lambs and ensure there are sufficient covers as we head into September. We start off, however, with Philip discussing the impact of the poor grazing conditions has had on lamb performance this year.
The last time we were on, we were hoping for it to dry up, and it did dry up, but I suppose that presented its own challenges then, and that I suppose grass got, we had come through the main reproduction phase. I suppose the grass had headed out, but it got, depending on where you are in the country, where it got very dry, I suppose grass became stressed and started to maybe head out again and become stemmier. So that kind of had an impact on grass quality for a lot of people just around that weaning period. And I suppose if we remember back on a lot of farms, lamb performance was back anyway. They had got a poorer start. So on a lot of farms, weaning weights and that were that little bit back on normal. And then combined with maybe poorer quality grass around that time, performance was continued to be a little bit back maybe on where it had normally be. And I suppose since then, we should never wish for rain. It hasn't really stopped. So certainly over here with us, we've had our wettest July, I think, on record. Normal rainfall levels here would be somewhere between 80 and 90 mils for the month. And I think we were over 220 mils for the month of July. So that then had its own knock-on effects. I suppose grass growth was reasonably good, although as we came through that period into the end of July and early August, growth rates were actually starting to come back a little bit. Ground was basically at waterlogged levels, certainly for some people. But the big knock-on effect that had was that I suppose the dry matter of the grass, where we would normally see dry matter levels this time of year, maybe 17, 18%. For a lot of weeks there, from mid-July to early August, we were seeing dry matters as low as 12 or 13%. So that has a big knock-on effect in terms of the amount of grass that lambs have to eat, or even their physical capacity to take in enough grass to meet their requirements. And that has had knock-on effects in terms of lamb performance as well. So yeah, look, it's been a challenging enough time, I suppose.
In some ways, Philip, it's been a perfect storm this year for lamb performance. A difficult turnout, went into a period of drought, grass quality declined, and then what we've seen over the past couple of weeks, hopefully we might be coming out of it. But look, there's been a consequence to that, and we'll come back to what impact that's going to have on demand later, but it has left a lot lighter lambs on farms and more lambs on farms at the moment. Just maybe to tease that one out a little bit, like, one of the consequences of that low dry matter grass, Philip, it can reduce intake. It's reducing overall energy intake in lambs.
Yeah, and I suppose, look, we can see it there again, depending on location and rainfall levels. Everybody, I suppose, has had significant rainfall levels now, but it just means that basically that lower dry matter grass, it's moving through the animal faster. Maybe in extreme cases, they're not maybe able to take in physically, the amount that they may require. But I suppose in a lot of cases, maybe it's moving through them faster, and their ability maybe to take the nutrients and the energy from that is restricted as well because of that passage rate. And I suppose you'll see that in lambs there. A lot of lambs getting fairly dirty, even with relatively low egg counts, and that it's not that it's maybe a parasite issue, but it can manifest itself in quite dirty lambs there as well in terms of the passage rate, like. And as you say, it's kind of a problem that has been compounded now, and that performance early in the year was back. And then as we move through the summer now, performance is back, and that's having a knock-on effect in terms of the amount of lambs that are drafted and the amount of lambs that are going to be left on the farm now as we move into September and October. And I suppose traditionally, we'd have more lambs gone, and that would be allowing us to build grass covers. That's going to be something that's going to be hard to be done this year. And that's going to have a knock-on effects in terms of, the amount of lambs that we have to feed, when they're going to be finished, but also having knock-on effects there in terms of, we say, the body condition score of the ewes. And that's something that we have to be very conscious of now as we move towards mating, and that could have a knock-on effect for next year's lamb crop. So all very important things to look at.
I think it'd be fair to say, look, it's had an impact on ewes too. A lot of places would have early weaned ewes, might have been tightened up a bit more. The fact that there's more lambs on farms now, we're mid-August, we'd like to see them numbers lightening, maybe giving ewes a bit more free rein. I don't think that's maybe happening on as many farms as we'd like.
No, and maybe it's something that people haven't really fully identified. I suppose in a normal year, if you had a leader follower system going on or whatever, and lambs were going ahead of ewes, but you were drafting lambs away the whole time, what kind of happens by default is that as the number of lambs reduces, there's more grass available to the ewes. So I suppose at weaning time, we'd have them tightened up and maybe not getting access to that much grass. But as more lambs are gone, there's more grass left behind as you move lambs on, and the ewes kind of just by that physical, I suppose the fact that there's less lambs eating the grass, there's more grass available to those ewes as they follow them, and slowly but surely their condition comes up because they're getting access to more quality grass and higher quantities of it. But this year, because there's more lambs around on a lot of farms, the quantity of grass, I suppose, that ewes have been getting, certainly over the last couple of weeks, is probably lower than normal, and that could be having a knock-on effect in terms of our ability to build condition score. And I suppose again, time is ticking on that, and maybe we're all trying to deal with the immediate effects of maybe we don't have as many lambs gone as we'd like, but that could very quickly become a bigger issue as well in terms of the lamb or the ewe condition score.
Yeah, look, it nearly happens by default in some cases. We have to acknowledge, look, there's huge variation out there. There's some farms that this doesn't have an impact on. But
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I suspect even you go further west, there's been a lot of second cuts delayed, even in some cases first cuts delayed. Yeah. The overall production quality of what's coming back is delayed, and that's let's be realistic. If silage has only come out on some farms in the past week or so, that's going to be September now before that's back into the rotation, and generally that first grazing off it won't maybe give the same yield. So there is a challenge there, for a lot of farms.
Yeah, so look at again weather controls everything with this, and silage was delayed. That's going to have a knock-on effect in terms of silage quality, I suppose, for the ewes in the winter, and that's probably something we're going to have to look at in terms of maybe paying more attention to our nutrition plans and that to correct for that. But as you say, in the immediate term, it means that maybe where traditionally there would have been more after grass and that coming back in, over the last couple of weeks, and now that's not going to be the case this year either. So maybe people are going to find themselves in a tighter situation for grass supply as they go into the autumn. And again, bearing in mind that they'll have a tighter grass situation and maybe a higher grass demand, depending on their drafting pattern.
Now, I'm conscious we're not painting a great story here, so let's talk a little bit about how we're going to manage some of this. If we go back to the grass growth rates, you got that initial bounce after the period of drought, and I think most farmers would have seen that decline a wee bit with waterlogging. It's starting to pick up again. What kind of growth rates are you seeing at the moment?
Yeah, so at the moment, as you say, grass growth rates have started to come back up a bit. And again, look, it's very location specific. So some places maybe are still, quite waterlogged, where it has had some sort of a chance to dry out a bit and temperatures are improving a bit. You could get growth rates back up to around 60 or whatever, which is more or less where you'd normally see them, and probably is okay to meet demand. But prior to that, I suppose in the wettest of the conditions, growth rates, were back, and probably where they'd normally be up around that 60 or 70, were probably down anywhere as low as maybe 40 to 50 in some cases. So, that had a knock-on effect in what was available, and I suppose that has knock-on effects in terms of what we can build from now on. So from now on, really, is what we're trying to build for the autumn, for both lambs and ewes. And I suppose, in a lot of cases there earlier on in the dry spell, people would have, not spread fertilizer because it was too dry, and that was the right thing to do. If the conditions aren't right for growth, there's spreading fertilizer isn't going to correct that. So people maybe would have skipped around the fertilizer or whatever where normally would have went out that time. And then in more recent times, the same thing would have happened, I suppose. Waterlogged soils or very heavy rain. That's not an appropriate time to be spreading fertilizer either. So again, people done the right thing. They didn't. But the knock-on effect of that, I suppose, is that there has been less fertilizer spread on farms, and there's less, I suppose, nutrients available there to drive our growth at the moment, and that's something we need to keep an eye on as well, in terms of if you've spread significantly less amounts of fertilizer than normal, and I suppose anecdotally what we're seeing is that people are maybe feeding less as well, and look at a lot of that is cost issues, but I suppose we can't have a situation where if we don't spread fertilizer and we don't put concentrated feed or whatever into the system, we're going to be lacking feed. We're going to be, a deficit in the feed budget, and that's not going to help the situation. And I suppose a little bit of that happened last year. Fertilizer prices were very high, meal prices were very high, and people, they just couldn't justify the costs of it. But we did end up with a lot of lambs being carried into the autumn, a lot more lambs than normal, and that had the knock-on effects into the new year. And I suppose we're looking at a similar trend emerging at the moment. Okay, fertilizer prices came back a little bit, but weather conditions maybe didn't allow for its use. And I suppose at the moment now the challenge is with the lower dry matter grass, and that we probably should be feeding a bit more meal, to try and even just balance that dry matter intake, the physical requirements of the lambs in particular. So that's something to consider.
We're going to hit that point where we're naturally heading into a period where grass growth rates are going to decline. We're going to hit that tipping point where demand on some farms will exceed it as we head into September. And unless there's sufficient cover to build at this stage or in the next couple of weeks, that's going to have a knock-on impact. Look, let's take the fertilizer story just for a moment in that. When to go, how much to go with, what we need to be aiming at.
Yeah, so I suppose the response we're going to get, the close period starts there the middle of September. Really, what we'll be kind of saying is you're going to get a much better response to fertilizers. It's going to be spread by the end of this month, by the end of August anyway. The later we leave it, the lower the response will be. So I suppose in terms of, it's still, quite expensive. So we want to get the best response we can from it. As regards what to spread, I suppose depending on stocking rates, depending on demands and that, higher stocked farms, and I suppose by that I mean maybe farms stocked higher than 10 ewes per hectare or whatever, or if you've significantly more lambs left than you'd normally have, you're probably looking at maybe 25 to 30 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, or I would say, about 25 units to the acre would want to be spread. For lower stocked farms, traditionally we would have said maybe down around 15 units to the acre. But again, look at this year, it's about maybe sitting down and having a look at, well, where are you at the moment compared to where you'd normally be, both in terms of the number of sheep you have on the farm for feeding, but also maybe in terms of what grass supply you have. And I suppose, look, for those that are measuring or whatever, they'll have, quite good information on that. But even if you're not measuring, you'll have a fair idea of where you'd normally be at on a particular year, what kind of coverage you'd have ahead of you, how many fields you'd have ahead of you, and where is it this year. If it's significantly back on that, we probably need to look at maybe upping the rates a little bit to compensate for that.
Let's just give a guide on that. Talk to me just about days ahead. It's a nice kind of figure of work. Where do we need to be at by the end of August in a typical year?
Yeah, so by the end of the month, really, we need to be about 20 days ahead. So again, if you're not measuring, most people will be able to tell us, how many days they'd get out of a typical field with their normal group of sheep. And I suppose a very simple thing would be just walk around the farm, make a quick note of, well, based on what we see in front of us here at the moment, this is what I think I'll get out of this. And you'd be able to put a fair stab on the kind of days ahead you have. As we move into September, then that has to increase because as you said, Kieran, growth rates are going to naturally come down anyway. it's about getting to that point then where you're actually building up grass from now on to carry you further into the autumn and winter. So as we get into September, we're looking at a days ahead figure of really 25 to 30 days. Again, as we get further into the month, the 30 days becomes the target, and then once we get into October, then you're kind of 30 days plus, so 35 to 40 days really is what you need in front of you. And we're only going to achieve that really if we try and do everything within our control to build that. So that's either getting the right amounts of fertiliser out and reducing the demands. So even simple things, if colliots haven't been removed from the farm or whatever, try and get them moved, or try and, separate them out to get them maybe a bit of feed into them as well to reduce your grass demand, to get them away off the farm. Implement finishing groups or whatever for the lambs. Again, if we're in a situation where we've more lambs left than normal, dry matters are still relatively low, we're going to get a response there from supplementing those lambs, because they're going to improve. They're going to respond better to that feed. And again, I suppose they're going to respond better the earlier we go in with that rather than the later. And hopefully maybe get to the point where we're not going to run the overall farm cover down too low too quickly, because once it's gone down, where we've very little grass left, it's going to be very hard to recover from that, because growth rates are going to be going down anyway. So that's something to bear in mind.
It's another useful thing to do, apart from you touched on looking your overall grass assessment, but even taking away a cross-section of lambs, just make a good estimate then of where they fall in relative to when they're going to finish. Like, I think we need to be realistic about that, particularly the year that's in it, rather than wait till mid-September and realise we've got a lot of lambs left.
Yeah, and I suppose again it's about assessing the options then. If there's lambs there that are quite close to finishing, and in a lot of cases there might be lambs there that maybe be of a reasonable weight but maybe are lacking flesh a little bit, and again it's a consequence, I suppose, of the weather conditions we've had. They could respond quite quickly and quite successfully to a short period of supplementation. Maybe you'll have your next section of lambs there that need that little bit more of a push but could be finished relatively easily, and then you may have a group of lambs there, and you may have to make a call on, well, actually, am I going to be able to finish these, or should I be looking at other options, maybe to offload some as stores or whatever, if there was a market for that. Again, it's not that we can give a definitive answer for everybody's circumstances, but at least maybe what we're saying is to maybe sit down and make a plan based on what you have in front of you, and a plan that you think is going to be most suitable for your farm.
No, so it's assessing the two things: your grass supply, what lambs are there relative finish. I suppose the key priority then, Philip, is what plan in place to boost supplies coming into the autumn, irrespective in some cases, or in a lot of cases, of where we're sitting.
Yeah, and I suppose you kind of said it there yourself, Kieran, the importance of it is to make a plan as soon as possible, really, in terms of, I suppose we can get lured into a false sense of security. Maybe growth and that has improved a little bit for a lot of people in the last week or so. But again, the circumstances that is in is probably different to a lot of years. So the quicker we can make a plan and assess where we're at, the quicker we can maybe have the most successful outcome for it.
Take advantage of improved conditions, hopefully. Phil, look, it was good getting you on for that update. Timely, I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks, Kieran.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. I'd like to thank Phil again for coming on with us, highlighting some key areas we can focus on for the coming weeks. That's it for me for this episode. Again, for updates on our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more episodes.